Ida for telling my Bil that I blame him for my sister's death. My older sister, Anna, who would have been 36 years old now, and I, 34, shared a bond that was inexplicably deep and enduring. From the very start, we were inseparable, even though our personalities and interests diverged in many ways. She was the artistic dreamer, finding solace in literature and music, while I was the pragmatic planner, more inclined towards logic and structure. Despite these differences, the thread that bound us was unbreakable, as though we were two halves of the same soul navigating the chaos of life together. Our connection was not born out of circumstance but out of a shared understanding that transcended words. Anna's influence was woven into the tapestry of my life at every turn. When she received her acceptance letter to a prestigious college, I was inspired to follow in her footsteps. Her ambition ignited my own, and though I chose a different field of study, I couldn't imagine being far from her. When my career took an unexpected leap, granting me a promotion that required relocating to a new city, Anna chose to move as well. It was an unspoken pact, a commitment to be each other's anchor in the often turbulent sea of life. In our shared experiences, we found a rhythm, a comforting familiarity that allowed us to face challenges without feeling alone. Our parents were, by all accounts, ordinary and unremarkable in their parenting approach. They provided for us, encouraged us in their own way, but never seemed to fully grasp the depth of our connection or the complexities of our individual struggles. Our older brother, John, was a distant figure in our lives. Although we shared blood, there was an emotional chasm between us that never quite closed. He preferred the solitude of his own pursuits, leaving Anna and me to form a bond that felt more profound, more enduring than the relationships we had with anyone else. Yet, even as we navigated life together, shadows lingered in our family history. Our paternal grandmother had battled severe mental illness for as long as anyone could remember. Though she was never formally diagnosed, the signs of her struggles were impossible to ignore. Her moods swung unpredictably, her days veiled in a darkness that seemed to seep into the very walls of her home. I often wondered if the echoes of her pain reverberated through our lineage, manifesting in the quiet melancholy that sometimes overtook Anna. It was a possibility I couldn't dismiss, even as a child, when I witnessed the fleeting moments of despair in my sister's otherwise vibrant presence. Anna's sophomore year of college marked a turning point, a chapter defined by pain and fragility. She faced a darkness so overwhelming that it led her to attempt to take her own life, not once, but multiple times. The memory of those days is etched into my mind with painful clarity. I remember the hushed phone calls from my parents, the hurried drives home to see her, and the heartache of watching someone I loved more than anything battle an invisible enemy. The decision was made for her to take a leave of absence from college, to return home and focus on her recovery. It was during this time that she was prescribed antidepressants, a small but necessary step toward stability. Our parents, however, struggled to confront the reality of Anna's condition. Denial became their refuge. They insisted she wasn't truly depressed, merely overwhelmed by the pressures of college life. When their friends inquired about Anna's absence, they brushed off the severity of the situation with dismissive excuses, claiming she was heartbroken over a failed relationship. The weight of their refusal to acknowledge her pain fell heavily on me. I couldn't understand how they could ignore what was so painfully evident. Anna deserved more than their dismissals. She deserved compassion and understanding. When I began college, Anna returned as well, and our lives resumed their shared trajectory. We decided to become roommates, a choice that was as much about practicality as it was about our unwavering connection. For our mother, who worried incessantly, this arrangement brought peace of mind. For Anna and me, it was a chance to recreate the sanctuary we had shared during our childhood. Living together again felt like slipping into a familiar rhythm. We knew each other's quirks, habits, and preferences. We could communicate without words, a silent understanding born from years of shared experiences. As Anna began to heal, I saw glimpses of the person she had been before the darkness took hold. She started to venture out of her comfort zone, joining me in exploring new clubs and attending parties. She made friends, cautiously but steadily, and began to rebuild her life. I was her cheerleader, her confidant, her unwavering support system. My sole mission was to ensure she never felt alone, to shield her from the isolation that had once consumed her. Our relationship might have appeared overly close to outsiders, but to us, it was a lifeline, a bond that allowed us to navigate life's challenges with courage and resilience. Reflecting on those years, I recognized that our relationship was, in many ways, codependent. But given the circumstances, it was the anchor we both needed. It was an unspoken agreement to be each other's protector, to fill the voids left by those who couldn't or wouldn't understand. For Anna, I was a steady presence in a world that often felt unsteady. For me, she was a source of inspiration, a reminder of the strength that could be found in vulnerability. Together, we created a sanctuary, a place where the shadows of our past could not touch us, and where the promise of a brighter future felt within reach. During my junior year in college, Anna's senior year, our lives took another pivotal turn when a mutual friend introduced her to his roommate, David. He was a man of few words but seemed kind-hearted, the type of person who could ease into conversations without dominating them. At first glance, he appeared unassuming, blending seamlessly into the background, a stark contrast to Anna's vibrant personality. Despite my protective instincts flaring up, I couldn't find an immediate reason to dislike him. Still, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Perhaps it was my natural wariness, the fierce loyalty I felt toward Anna, or an unconscious need to scrutinize anyone who dared to become a significant part of her life. David came from a family steeped in traditional values, the kind where Sunday dinners were more than just a meal. They were a reaffirmation of roles, expectations, and unyielding beliefs. His father, a stoic patriarch, held court at the head of the table, while his mother, soft-spoken but firm in her adherence to societal norms, embodied the quintessential stay-at-home wife. David, thankfully, didn't echo these perspectives. In fact, he often expressed disapproval of his parents' rigid worldview. Yet, knowing how deeply ingrained those values were, I worried they might influence him in ways he didn't even realize. Anna, on the other hand, stood as a paragon of modern independence. She adamantly opposed the idea of ever having children, not out of disdain but because of an intrinsic fear rooted in her struggles with mental health, body image, and a profound sense of self-awareness. She wasn't the maternal type who cooed at babies or dreamt of family homes filled with the laughter of children. Instead, she envisioned a life of intellectual pursuits, creative endeavors, and a partnership based on equality rather than traditional roles. She balked at the idea of being financially dependent on a man or sacrificing her dreams to fit into a mold someone else had created. If Anna had ever chosen a different path, embracing motherhood, settling into a life of domesticity, or even becoming a stay-at-home mom like David's mother, I would have supported her wholeheartedly. My concern was never about her choices but about ensuring they were truly hers and not born from external pressures. David's entrance into her life brought this into sharper focus. Although he initially seemed respectful of her boundaries, a quiet apprehension lingered at the back of my mind, a whisper that grew louder over time. The years passed, and David and Anna tied the knot. Their relationship seemed stable on the surface, but subtle cracks began to appear around their 5th anniversary. David started broaching the subject of children with increasing frequency. It began innocently enough: casual remarks during dinner, musings about what their kids might look like, or jokes about passing on his family's infamous dimples. But over time, these discussions morphed into something more persistent, almost relentless. Anna, true to herself, was candid in her responses. She explained that she was deeply uncomfortable with every aspect of the birthing process, her feelings about parenthood aside. Pregnancy, to her, wasn't a miraculous journey, it was a harrowing ordeal. Her anxiety around reproductive health was a long-standing issue, almost a facet of her identity. She would pore over articles about ovarian cysts, fibroids, and rare complications, sending me detailed messages if she experienced even the slightest discomfort. I remember one instance vividly. She had felt mildly bloated for a few days and convinced herself she might have a serious condition. While it might have seemed excessive to some, I understood that her anxiety wasn't rooted in logic but in an overwhelming fear of losing control over her body. Even as a teenager, Anna had expressed her aversion to the idea of pregnancy. I remember her asking our parents for a hysterectomy at the age of 17, a request that was, of course, denied but highlighted just how deeply she felt about the issue. Her apprehension wasn't solely about the physical toll, it was intertwined with her mental health. For years, she had been on a high dose of SSRIs, medications that kept her balanced and functional. The thought of going off them, even temporarily, filled her with dread. I had witnessed the devastating effects of withdrawal firsthand when the airline lost her luggage during a vacation, forcing her to stop cold turkey. She had become unrecognizable in those few days, a near constant stream of tears, breathless panic attacks, and debilitating stomach cramps. That experience cemented her decision. She would never willingly put herself in a position where she had to endure that again. Despite her steadfast refusal, David's persistence never wavered. They had, at one point, reached a compromise adoption. Anna had been cautiously optimistic about the idea, viewing it as a way to meet David halfway without compromising her own boundaries. But as the years rolled on, David's yearning for biological children resurfaced with greater intensity. He spoke of wanting to see a little version of them running around, someone with Anna's sharp wit and his sense of humor. To him, it wasn't just about having children, it was about creating a tangible legacy, a living testament to their union. At one point, his desperation took a shocking turn. In a conversation that Anna later recounted to me with a mix of disbelief and anger, David floated the idea of finding another woman to carry his child. The sheer audacity of the suggestion left her reeling. It was a betrayal of everything they had agreed upon, a blatant disregard for her feelings and fears. That night, she packed a bag and came to stay at my apartment. For a week, we shared our old routine, eating takeout on the couch, binge-watching bad TV, and talking late into the night. She vented her frustration, her voice tinged with both hurt and exhaustion. By the end of her stay, she seemed resolute, ready to draw a firm line in the sand. When Anna eventually returned to David, I assumed the matter had been settled. She was strong, resilient, and unyielding when it came to her principles. Surely, David had come to understand the depth of her convictions. But as the months turned into years, I would come to realize just how deeply the seeds of this conflict had been sown, and how they would eventually grow into a tragedy none of us could have foreseen. Imagine my shock when Anna dropped the bombshell over our weekly coffee meetup. With her characteristic casualness, she mentioned she was getting her IUD removed. The statement hung in the air, heavy and incongruous, as if someone had shattered a delicate piece of glass. I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that never came. She explained, almost as if she were trying to convince herself, that David had finally persuaded her. Adoption wouldn't be enough, nor would surrogacy, both of which they had discussed extensively and agreed upon in the past. He wanted the natural baby experience, she said. The words felt foreign in her mouth, her tone betraying none of the conviction she usually carried. Anna had always been vehemently opposed to the idea of pregnancy, and now, here she was, echoing David's reasoning as if it were her own. Apparently, the notion of a little person running around with a blend of their features was too enticing for him to let go. I couldn't hide my concern. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The thought of her enduring the mental and physical toll of pregnancy was almost unbearable to me. Though she hadn't been suicidal in years, I knew her history was not something to take lightly. Anna gave me a wan smile, brushing off my concerns. "It's the least I can do for David," she said. Her voice carried a tone of resignation that made my chest tighten. She reminded me that David earned far more than she did, implying an unspoken debt she felt compelled to repay. It was as if she were surrendering a piece of herself to fulfill an obligation she never truly believed in. She had a plan, though a fragile one. She intended to taper off her SSRIs over the course of a month, a timeline I thought was far too short. I urged her to reconsider, to give herself more time to adjust, but David, eager to start their journey toward parenthood, was impatient. Her compliance felt out of character, but I knew better than to push her too hard. Anna was stubborn in her own way, and once she made up her mind, there was little anyone could do to sway her. A few months later, the inevitable happened. Anna was pregnant. What should have been a joyous milestone for any expectant couple quickly turned into a nightmare. The first trimester was a brutal test of her resilience. Without the safety net of her medication, Anna's emotions became a storm that she struggled to weather. Hormonal shifts exacerbated her already fragile mental state, and her usually mild dysmorphia spiraled into something far more destructive. She often called me in tears, her voice trembling as she confessed her feelings of inadequacy and fear. The physical toll of pregnancy only compounded her struggles. Morning sickness hit her like a freight train, leaving her nauseated and weak multiple times a week. Constipation and relentless fatigue sapped what little energy she had left. The woman who once found solace in structure and routine was now at the mercy of her own body, a prisoner of the changes she had once vowed to avoid. And where was David during all of this? He was absent more often than not, consumed by a demanding job that couldn't be done from home. His ambition, once a trait Anna admired, became a source of isolation for her. I couldn't stand by and watch her crumble under the weight of it all. I moved in with Anna and David, hoping that my presence might provide some semblance of stability. It was an adjustment for all of us, but I was willing to do whatever it took to help Anna navigate this difficult time. When she went in for her ultrasound and the technician revealed she was carrying twins, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. Twin boys. The revelation seemed to momentarily lift the heavy cloud that had enveloped her. She even smiled, telling me she was happy that her little boys would have a built-in friend, just like us. It was the first time in months that she seemed genuinely excited about the future. That glimmer of light gave me a fleeting sense of relief, enough that I felt comfortable leaving for a short work trip. It was only for a few days, and Anna assured me she was feeling stronger. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But when I returned, everything had unraveled. Anna was gone. At just 4 months into her pregnancy, the weight of it all became too much. The darkness that she had fought so hard to keep at bay had consumed her once again, and this time, there was no one who could pull her back. The funeral was a blur of grief and disbelief. I stood among family and friends, surrounded by condolences and tear-streaked faces, but I felt utterly alone. The city that had been a backdrop to so many memories with Anna now felt suffocating, haunted by the echoes of her laughter and the spaces she used to fill. I couldn't stay. The thought of walking the same streets, passing the same coffee shop where we once met every week, was unbearable. My job, at least, offered an escape. I frequently traveled for work, and after explaining my situation to my boss, I requested a transfer to one of our international offices. To my surprise, the request was met with empathy and understanding. Within a month, I had sold or packed up my belongings and boarded a one-way flight to start anew. The distance was both a balm and a burden, a way to heal but also a reminder of what I had left behind. 2 years passed in a blur of new experiences and tentative steps toward rebuilding my life. When I finally returned to the United States, it felt like stepping into a world that had continued turning without me. Over the weekend, I agreed to meet David and my parents for dinner, a reunion that carried the weight of unspoken grievances and unresolved pain. It was a chance to reconnect, to bridge the gap that time and distance had created. But as I would soon learn, some wounds run too deep for time to heal. At first, dinner with my parents and David felt like a tentative step toward rebuilding the fragile threads of connection that had unraveled in the wake of Anna's death. The initial moments were surprisingly warm, even comforting, as we exchanged updates about our lives. My parents, now comfortably settled into retirement, spoke of quiet mornings spent gardening and rediscovering old hobbies. David, to my mild surprise, revealed he had recently downloaded Tinder, making a self-deprecating joke about venturing back into the dating pool at his age. We laughed, not because it was particularly funny, but because laughter felt easier than the heavy silence that might otherwise settle over us. For a brief time, it seemed like we had found a neutral ground where we could remember Anna without reopening old wounds. We reminisced about her sharp wit, her ability to light up a room with her presence, and her unshakable determination to live life on her own terms. But the fragile peace didn't last. The conversation shifted, as it inevitably would, toward the subject of her death. The atmosphere turned tense, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. What began as a discussion of grief quickly devolved into something darker, a confrontation years in the making. It started subtly, with my parents expressing disappointment about how I had chosen to cope with Anna's death. They hinted at the burden they had borne in the aftermath, sorting through her belongings, handling legal matters, and navigating the labyrinth of grief while I was, in their words, off partying with foreign boys. The accusation stung, but I tried to remind myself that their anger was rooted in pain. They didn't see my move overseas as a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating weight of loss. They saw it as abandonment. David, who had been largely silent, suddenly broke down. His face twisted with raw emotion as he confessed something I could never have anticipated. He admitted he wished Anna had been killed, not because he wanted her gone, but because it would have given him someone to blame. The words hung in the air like a dagger, sharp and unforgiving. Then, as if the floodgates had opened, he unleashed years of pent-up guilt and resentment. He blamed Anna for what had happened, for ending her own life and, in doing so, taking their twin boys with her. The grief in his voice was undeniable, but so was the bitterness. He spoke of their lost potential, their sons, whose faces he would never see, whose lives would never begin. Hearing him speak that way about Anna felt like a slap to the face. How could he, the man who claimed to love her, reduce her to a vessel for the children he never got to meet? How could he speak of her as though she were the villain in her own tragedy? I felt the familiar burn of anger rising in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I snapped. The words tumbled out of me with a force I couldn't contain. If anyone killed Anna, it was you. The room erupted. My parents leaped to David's defense, their voices sharp with indignation as they demanded I leave. I barely registered their words as I grabbed my coat and walked out, the door slamming behind me like an exclamation point on a fight that had been simmering for years. Outside, the cold night air bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal. My parents had chosen to comfort David, the man who had pushed Anna to the brink, rather than their own daughter. In the days that followed, the fallout was relentless. My voicemail filled with angry messages from my parents, each one a dagger aimed at my already wounded heart. They accused me of being selfish, of abandoning my family in their time of need, and even of being complicit in Anna's death. The sheer absurdity of their accusations left me reeling. How could they twist the narrative so thoroughly? How could they place the blame on me, when all I had ever done was try to protect Anna? The one silver lining was John, our older brother, who called after hearing about the incident. Though we had never been particularly close, he listened as I poured out my side of the story, his voice calm and measured as he offered his perspective. He shared my resentment toward David, admitting that he had never fully trusted him. But he also urged me to apologize, not because he thought David deserved it, but because it would make things easier. Keeping the peace, he called it, as though it were a simple matter of swallowing my pride and moving on. But the thought of apologizing to David made my stomach churn. How could I offer an olive branch to the man who had tried to reshape Anna into something she was never meant to be? How could I pretend to forgive someone who had cared more about his dream of fatherhood than about the woman he had vowed to love and protect? The idea felt like a betrayal of Anna's memory, a compromise I couldn't bring myself to make. Even now, I grapple with the weight of it all. I know that my words at dinner were harsh, perhaps even unfair. David is grieving too, and grief makes people say and do things they might not otherwise. But I can't shake the feeling that his actions, his relentless pressure, played a role in Anna's unraveling. And while I know that apologizing would smooth things over with my family, I can't help but wonder if doing so would come at the cost of my own integrity. So, am I the asshole for refusing to apologize? Maybe. But if standing up for Anna means being seen as the villain, then so be it. I'd rather carry that burden than let her memory be tarnished by those who failed to truly see her, even in the end.